"I can cook, clean, and mend. Please don't send me back," she pleaded softly. The fire had been out 3 days when she found it. I know because I'd let it go cold on purpose. Hadn't seen the point of it anymore. A fire for one man in a canyon that big is just like showing everyone where you are. And I'd been moving quiet for so long that warmth felt like a luxury I'd trained myself past. You stop needing things when you're out long enough. Or you tell yourself that, which is near enough the same. I'd come back to the old camp only to collect a coil of rope I'd left hung on a juniper. That's all. I wasn't living there. I wasn't living anywhere in particular that spring. Just moving through the country the way I'd moved through it for the better part of 20 years, doing what scouts do, or what they do when the army doesn't need them for a stretch, and they're not quite sure what else they are. She was crouched beside the dead fire ring when I walked up out of the wash. Didn't hear me coming, which told me something. She was exhausted or she was sick or both, because a woman who'd survived out here this long wasn't careless by nature. She had a blanket pulled around her that wasn't much of a blanket anymore, more like a length of trade cloth with the fray worked up to her elbows. She was trying to get a coal going in the ash with a stick that was too green. It wouldn't catch. She kept blowing on it anyway. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, and she looked up. We stayed that way a long moment, long enough for me to see the bruise along her jaw, already going yellow at the edges, which meant it was 4 or 5 days old. Long enough to see she was Apache, the cut of her clothes before they'd been torn, the way she held herself even half collapsed over a dead fire pit. There were scratch marks on her forearms consistent with running through mesquite in the dark. Her moccasins were nearly gone. She spoke first. Her English surprised me. Not perfect, but clear enough, and the clarity of it cost her something. I could see her marshaling it, picking each word like she was spending from a small stock. She said, "I can cook, clean, and mend. Please don't send me back." She said it softly, the way you say something you've been rehearsing, maybe for days. Rehearsing because you know the thing you're asking for is large, and you're not sure you have enough left to make the case for it. I looked at her a moment more. Then I went and found some dry stuff under the overhang where I'd cached a few supplies, and I built her a fire. "My name is Cal Briggs. That won't mean anything to you. It didn't mean much to most people I knew, either. I was just the man you sent for when you needed to know where a trail went or whether a canyon had water at the bottom of it. I'd scouted for the Army out of Fort Bowie for 11 years, then done private work for a survey outfit for 3, then just drifted. I was 53 years old that April, and I had no address and no family I was in contact with, and no particular reason to be in the canyon. I was in, except that I knew where the water was, and the horse needed rest. I'm not saying that to invite pity. I'm just telling you what the situation was. A man on his own gets used to accounting to nobody, and the flip side of that is that nobody accounts for him either. I'd accepted the trade, or I thought I had. Her name, as near as I could say it, was something that meant a particular kind of light. The light that comes just before the sun actually clears the rim, when the sky goes from black to a color that isn't quite any color yet. She told me that later. That night she told me only that she'd been traveling 7 days, and that she needed to be away from the soldiers' road, and that she could work. I fed her salt pork and the last of a cold cornbread I'd made 2 days prior, and she ate it all without stopping and without embarrassment, which told me the pride was in the offering. The I can cook, clean, and mend, not in the pretending she wasn't hungry. She slept by the fire. I sat up with the rifle across my knees, not because I thought anything would come, but because it felt right. Felt like the thing you do when someone's in your camp. In the morning she was up before me, which I hadn't expected. She had water boiling and she'd found the coffee in my pack, found it, measured it, and was doing everything right. She handed me a cup when I sat up, and she didn't look like she was waiting for thanks. She just looked like she was keeping her end of something. I drank the coffee. It was better than mine. Here's what I knew about the situation without asking. The army had been moving Apache families in that part of the territory for the better part of 2 years. Some went easy, some didn't. The ones who didn't end up on the right reservation list sometimes ended up in places I didn't like thinking about, and I'd been scout long enough to know what happened at some of those camps. I'd seen things I hadn't reported because I knew what happened to scouts who reported those things. That's its own weight I carry. What I didn't know was her particular story, and I didn't push for it. I knew she'd been hit. I knew she'd run. I knew she'd traveled 7 days with nothing but that dead blanket and worn-out moccasins and enough English to make her case to a stranger. The rest would come when she wanted to give it. What I knew about myself in that moment was this. I could put her on the trail north and send her toward Tucson and tell her to find the Indian agent, and that would be the end of it. And it would probably be the end of her, too, because the Indian agent in that district was a man named Hooper who I knew personally, and I wouldn't have sent a stray dog to Hooper. Or I could figure something else. I didn't make a big decision about it. I'm not sure I made a decision at all. I just didn't tell her to go. We stayed in that canyon 4 more days, while her feet recovered enough to walk properly. I'm not going to prettify that time. She was hurt and I was a stranger, and she didn't trust me any further than she could afford to, which was about the length of the camp. She slept on the far side of the fire. She kept her own counsel. She worked God, she worked. She had the camp cleaner than I'd had it in years. She fixed a split in my bedroll canvas with some thread she'd somehow kept in a knot at her waist. She found plants along the canyon wall I didn't know, and made something with them that she ate, and that she offered me, and that tasted like nothing I could name but settled warm. I tried not to stare at her. I'm telling you that plainly because it's true, and because I'm not interested in dressing it up. She was a handsome woman, not young, maybe 35 or thereabouts, with the look of someone who'd done hard work and survived hard things and come out of it carrying herself with a precision that I associated with people who knew exactly what they had left and weren't going to waste it. She had a way of being still that was different from the stillness of a person at rest. It was a stillness with attention in it, the way a good horse stands, not idle, just ready. I thought about that more than I should have, those 4 days. On the second evening, she told me a small piece of the story. Her husband had died 18 months ago, sickness, not violence. Her son was at the San Carlos reservation, and she'd been separated from him when a group was moved, and the papers were wrong, and then a soldier had gotten involved, and there had been a misunderstanding that stopped being a misunderstanding when the bruise happened. She said that part without inflection, the way you say something when you've already spent all the feeling on it. She wanted to get to San Carlos, wanted to find her boy. I knew San Carlos. I'd scouted that country in '78. It was 200 and some miles, through territory that was in no way safe for a woman alone, and in no way safe for that woman in particular. I told her I knew the way. She looked at me for a moment, not suspicious exactly, more like a person doing arithmetic. She said, "You would take me." I said, "Unless you'd rather navigate 200 miles of bad country alone, in moccasins held together with my good wishes." It was the first time she almost smiled, not quite, but almost. We left before first light on the 5th day. I had a second horse, a dun gelding I'd been leading as a spare since the bay I preferred had thrown a shoe I'd only half fixed, and I was babying her. I put Nolly, that's what I'll call her, a name she offered me as a simplified version of her own, a gift of practicality. I put Nolly on the bay and took the dun myself, and we went south and east along the canyon bottom for 6 miles before we turned. The first week she didn't talk much, not unfriendly, just measuring. I'd been around enough people of different nations to know that silence wasn't hostility, and I let it sit. I talked when it was useful, water here, dry wash there, that ridge looks closer than it is, and the crossing isn't until you've gone another mile east, and she listened the way a good navigator listens, which is to say, she didn't acknowledge every word, but the next morning she remembered all of it. She was good with the horses, better than I'd expected, which was my own assumption to be corrected. She had a way of settling the bay when the mare got nervy about something in the brush, a hand on the neck, a sound that wasn't quite a word, something between. The mare would drop her head. I'd had that horse 3 years and I'd never managed to quiet her that smooth. I told her that. She said the horse was just afraid, and you had to let it know what you already knew, that the thing in the brush wasn't going to come out. I thought about that for a while, still think about it. By the second week she'd started asking questions, not personal ones yet practical ones. How long had I scouted? Did I know the country all the way to San Carlos or only part of it? Were there soldiers at the crossing she was thinking of, or had they moved? She was planning. Even riding with me, she was planning, keeping her own map in her head, maintaining her own options. I respected that more than I knew how to say. On the 10th night we made camp along a creek I knew, and there was good grass, and the horses were tired, and I built a fire, and she was quiet for a while, and then she said, "Why are you helping me?" I'd been waiting for that. I thought about saying something simple, something true but small. Instead I told her something I hadn't told anyone, which was that I'd been at a camp in '79 where things had gone wrong, and I hadn't done what I should have done, and I'd been carrying it since. I didn't go into detail. I just said I owed a debt that I couldn't pay to the people I owed it to, and that maybe this was something in the direction of it. She listened, then she said, "That is not a good reason." I looked at her. She said, "A debt is not why you build a fire for someone. A debt is cold." She poked at the coals and didn't say anything else for a while. I didn't either. The creek ran over some rocks off to our left, and the horses were moving around in the grass making that tearing sound. Then she said, quiet, like she was answering a question she'd been turning over, "You built the fire first, before I explained myself. That is why I stayed." I don't know that I'd ever had anything put to me that plainly. It wasn't the kind of thing I knew what to do with. So I did what I knew how to do, which was to tend the fire and let it sit. There was a stretch of country, about 2 weeks, and that gave us trouble. I'd been counting on a water source that turned out to be dry. Drought had gotten it, more severe than I'd known. We had the canteens and a good collapsible canvas tank I carried for exactly that reason. But it put us on shorter rations than I liked, and I had to reroute, which added a day and a half, and took us closer to a route the Army used than I wanted. On the second of those days we came up on a rise and saw dust to the south, a column, maybe a dozen horses, moving east on the road below. We stayed in the rocks and I glassed them. Blue coats, junior officers by the look of it, out on some patrol without particular purpose. I knew the type. Bored men are the most dangerous kind in that country because they're looking for something to justify the ride. Nolly was beside me, flat in the rocks, absolutely still. She'd gone still the second I'd put the glass up, not asking, not moving, not doing anything to make herself present. Just gone quiet in a way that told me she'd done this before, more than once. That sat with me, the knowing that this was practiced, that she'd had to practice it. The column moved on without looking up. We waited 20 minutes after the dust settled before we moved. Coming down off the rocks, my foot slipped in some loose shale and I caught myself on my hand and cut the palm on something. Not deep, but dirty. She saw it before I'd registered it was worth noting. That evening at camp, she cleaned it with water and something she'd gathered. I didn't ask what, and wrapped it with a strip of cloth she tore from inside her blanket without ceremony, not making anything of the sacrifice of the cloth. I sat there and let her work on my hand and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, which was the specific awareness that someone was taking care of me. Not because they were paid to, not because they were kin obligated to, just because she'd seen a thing that needed doing and she was doing it. I looked at her bent over my palm and she looked up at the same moment, and for a second neither of us said anything, and then she tied off the wrapping and said, "Don't let it get wet for 2 days." I said I'd do my best. She said, "You don't do your best with wounds. You do what is needed." It came out stern, and then she saw something on my face. I don't know what, and the corner of her mouth moved. Not quite the smile from before. This time it got further. "I should tell you about the country, because the country is part of the story. There is a quality to that part of the territory in the spring that I've never found anywhere else. The desert goes green in ways it shouldn't, in ways that seem like they can't hold. The Ocotillo puts out these red flowers at the tips that look ridiculous against the rock and dust, like the desert is trying something it doesn't have the materials for. But it works. It works in a way you don't expect. And in the morning, when the light comes up slow over the eastern ridges, the whole thing goes a kind of gold that is warm without being soft, if you understand what I mean. It's not gentle country, but it's not indifferent either." We rode through it, and I watched her watch it, and she watched it the way you watch something you've known a long time and been away from. She knew this country or country like it from somewhere in her history, and I could see the recognition in how her body eased, how her shoulders settled, how the horse walked differently when Nolly stopped carrying herself so defended. On one of those mornings, she started to talk. Not about the camp or the soldier or her husband. She talked about her boy. His name was a word I couldn't say right, but she tried to teach me anyway, patient about it, correcting my pronunciation without making me feel the fool. He was 11. He'd been at San Carlos 9 months. The last word she'd had was from another woman who'd come through, second-hand news, that he was alive and working in the fields they made them work. She said, "He knows I am coming. I told him always, if we are separated I will come." I believed her. I believed it the way you believe a thing when the person saying it isn't hoping you'll believe them. They've just stated a fact of the universe, and they need you to understand it, not validate it. I said, "We'll get there." She looked at me, not the arithmetic look, something else, something that took account of me more fully. She said, "I know." 2 words, but the way she said them, it was more like, "I see you. I have seen you. I've been watching what you are, and I know you'll do what you say you'll do." I'd been a scout for 23 years. I'd had commanding officers tell me well done. I'd had other scouts respect my read of country. That was all its own kind of value, I won't diminish it. But no one had ever said those 2 words to me in that particular way. Like the whole of what I'd been and done had added up to something in the account of a person whose judgment I trusted. I turned back to the trail. I had dust in my eyes, is what I told myself. About 3 days out from San Carlos, we got into real trouble. A man named Curly, Leonard Curly, a former Army scout who'd gone into business for himself doing what he called relocation assistance, which meant he found Apache people who'd scattered from the reservations, and he returned them for a fee. And the manner of return was what you'd expect from a man paid by the delivery, and not by the condition of delivery. Curly had apparently been working this part of the territory for a few weeks. And we came around a bluff one afternoon directly into him and 2 hired men. He recognized Nolly before I understood what was happening. One of his men had a rifle up before I could read the situation. Curly was a thin man with a pale mustache and the confident unpleasantness of someone who'd never suffered a real consequence. He looked at Nolly the way you look at a thing that has a price on it. Then he looked at me. He said, "Step off, Briggs." He knew my name, which meant he'd been asking around at one of the posts and someone had mentioned a man and an Apache woman moving southeast. That was useful information, and I filed it while the rest of me was calculating. He said, "She's on the books as a resettlement. You're obstructing." I said, "Show me the paper." He said he didn't need paper out here. He had authority from the subagent. I said, "Show me the paper or you're a man with a gun in the desert and nothing else." He moved his hand toward his coat, and I had the Colt out before he'd reached whatever he was reaching for, which wasn't a paper. It was a move to change the geometry. The man with the rifle hesitated, and that was his mistake, because Nolly moved. Not toward them. Sideways, fast, behind the bay, using the horse as cover the way someone does who has thought about this moment, who has war-gamed it, who has spent 11 months since her husband died making sure that when something came she'd have a plan. Curly's man swung the rifle toward her, and I put a round past his ear close enough to feel, and he dropped the rifle in the dirt and grabbed his head. Curly went very still. I held the Colt on him. My hand was steady. 23 years of country does that. I told him 3 things in a row, quiet, not shouting, the way you tell things when you want them to stick. I know your name. I know your employer's name. And I know where to find both of you if this woman doesn't make San Carlos. If you come east of this point, you will not get back from the east of this point. Am I being clear? He looked at me for a long time. Men like Curly are good at reading which way it goes, or they don't last. He read it and he didn't like it and he turned his horse. His man picked up the rifle out of the dirt and they went west and didn't look back. I held the Colt until they were a quarter mile gone. Then I put it away. My hands were still steady. That's the strange thing in the moment you're fine. It's after. Nolly came up beside me. She was looking at where they'd gone. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she put her hand on my arm. Not a grip, not a squeeze of relief. Just her hand on my forearm, flat. The way you put your hand on something solid when you want to feel that it's there. I looked at her hand and then I looked at her face and she was looking at me with an expression I didn't have the right word for. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was something older than gratitude. Something that had weight in it, the weight of a person seeing another person plainly, the way they actually are and staying. I said we should move. She said yes. She left her hand there another second. Then we rode. San Carlos was 2 long days from there. We didn't talk as much those last days. Not from tension, from something that happens when something you've been moving toward is close enough that you can feel it, and you stop needing to talk around it. She was thinking about her son. I was thinking about that too, and about what it would mean when we got there, which I was not yet ready to finish thinking about. The reservation, when we came to it, was not the worst I'd seen, which is a terrible way to damn a place, but it's honest. There were families. There was a structure of something. An agent who was, as far as I could tell in the first hour, less corrupt than most. A middle-aged man named Treadwell who'd been a minister before he'd been an agent, and who had the slightly desperate look of a man still trying to do something right in a situation designed to prevent it. I explained who we were and what we were doing, and Treadwell sent a boy running while I was still talking. The boy came back with the boy. He was 11 and he had his mother's stillness and his mother's way of holding himself, and when he came around the corner of the building and she was there, he stopped walking and they looked at each other for a second that seemed longer than a second, the kind of second that has years in it. And then she went to him, and the way she went to him, arms coming around him, the side of her face going down to the top of his head, was not a thing I had any business watching. I looked away. I looked at the mountains to the east, which were going orange in the last of the afternoon light. I heard her say something in Apache, I don't know what. The boy said something back, quick, the way kids talk when they're overwhelmed and trying to hold on. Then quiet. When I looked back, she had one arm still around his shoulders, and she was looking at me across the yard. She said his name for me, the one she'd been teaching me to pronounce. She said it and he looked at me, and I nodded at him, and he nodded back with the formality that 11-year-old boys have when they're trying to be men. She said, "Cal, this is my son." It was the first time she'd used my name. I stayed 3 days. I told myself it was to make sure there were no complications from Curly, and that was part of it. But Treadwell was reasonably accommodating and Curly didn't show, and there were no complications, and I stayed anyway. I ate at their fire. Nolly cooked, and she cooked the way she did everything, without waste, without fanfare, with a precision that made the food better than it had any reason to be given what she had to work with. The boy, I'll call him by the English name the agent had given him, Elias, though that wasn't what she called him. Elias was watchful around me, the way kids are watchful around men they're not sure of. He watched me eat, and he watched how his mother spoke to me, and he watched how I spoke to her, and he made his calculations. On the second morning, he came and sat near me while I was cleaning the rifle and asked me, in careful English, if I had killed many men. I said I hoped not to have killed any I didn't have to. He thought about that. Then he asked if the rifle was heavy. I said, "Want to hold it?" He held it for a minute, working out the weight, turning it over. Then he handed it back and went to find his mother, and I heard him say something to her in Apache that made her respond in a way that wasn't quite words, more like a sound that confirmed something. On the third evening, she walked with me out to where I'd picketed the horses. The light was going and it was cool. She had a shawl now, something Treadwell's wife had given her, and she had it across her shoulders and her arms crossed over it against the cold. We stood by the horses and didn't talk for a minute. The bay nuzzled at her and she put a hand on the mare's face without looking at it, automatic, the way you are with things you've come to trust. She said, "You will go tomorrow." It wasn't a question. I said, "I expect so." She nodded, looked at the mountains, which were still holding a little light at the very tops. She said, "Where will you go?" I said I hadn't settled on anything, which was true. It had been true for about 3 years and it suddenly felt different to say it out loud. She said, "There is a valley 2 days north of here. I saw it when I was young. Good water, grass enough for a small herd. The man who had a claim on it gave it up and went east." I didn't say anything. She said, "A man who knows the country, who can read it, who is not afraid of work. That valley would not be hard to make something of." I looked at her. She was still looking at the mountains. I said, "That sounds like you're giving me a suggestion about where to be." She said, "I am saying a valley exists, and that it needs someone who knows what he's doing." Another pause. The horses shifted. She said, still quiet, still not looking at me, and that Elias needs a man to show him things. Not his father. His father is gone, but a man. The kind who holds a rifle without weight in his eyes and hands it to a boy without making it a lesson in anything except how it feels. I thought about that boy with the rifle and the sound she'd made when he reported something to her. I said, "That valley. Is it near enough that a man living in it might see you regularly?" She turned and looked at me then, full on. The mountains still going orange behind her, and the light in her face, and her arms still crossed over the shawl, and her eyes doing what her eyes did, which was see things exactly as they were, and not 1 degree otherwise. She said, "If he chose to, yes." I looked at her for a long time. I said, "Then I think I'll go look at that valley before I decide anything." She held my gaze a moment more. Then she reached out and touched my face, her hand against my jaw, just for a second, the way you touch something you've decided is yours to care for, plain and without apology. Then she dropped her hand and turned back toward the fire. She said over her shoulder, "Don't let that cut get wet." I stood by the horses in the cooling dark, and I will tell you honestly that I was not sure I knew what to do with what I was feeling, which was something large that had no name I'd been given for it. Something in the category of worth, of being seen, of a woman with everything to lose choosing, carefully, with both eyes open, to stand beside a man like me. I found the valley. That was 11 years ago. The valley is still good, better now. There's a house that I built not fine but solid, which is what I knew how to build. There's a barn that Elias helped me put up the second year, when he was 13 and starting to get the height of himself. And I will tell you he worked hard and didn't complain and measured twice the way I showed him, which is maybe the most important thing I know about the character of work. She came out from San Carlos the year after I settled the valley. There wasn't a ceremony about it. She just came, and she brought a few things, and she was there, and then she was there every day, which is how it happens when it happens honestly. Elias is 22 now and working a spread of his own to the east, and he comes on Sundays, and she feeds him enough for 3 men, and he sits with me in the evening and talks about the herd, and about a girl from the settlement he's been quietly circling for the better part of a year. And I listen and I tell him what I know, which isn't everything, but it's something. On the mornings when I'm stiff from the cold, the shoulder I broke in '84, the knee that's been talking to me since the winter before last, she brings coffee before I've gotten up, and she sits on the edge of the bed and we drink it and watch the window go from dark to gray to the color that doesn't have a name yet. Her name for that light. The light that comes before the sun clears the rim. I asked her once, this was maybe 4 years ago, I asked her if she'd been afraid that morning in the canyon when she said it. The I can cook, clean, and mend. The please don't send me back. She was quiet for a moment. She was mending something, I don't remember what, and she kept her eyes on the work. She said, not afraid of you, afraid of the words, afraid they were the wrong ones. I said, what would the right ones have been? She said, I don't know. I knew only that you had already built the fire, so I said what I had. I thought about that. The way the right words are sometimes the wrong ones, and sometimes the wrong words are the only ones available, and you say them anyway because the fire's already burning, and you have to start from where you are. I said they were good enough. She looked up at me from the mending. She looked at me the way she looks at me still, plainly, fully, with that particular attention that leaves no part of you unaccounted for, that sees the broke parts and the whole parts and the years and the miles and calls all of it acceptable, calls all of it worth something. She said, yes, they were. The lamp was burning low and outside the evening was going dark, and somewhere out in the pasture the horses were settling, and I sat with the woman who'd said 5 words in a dead canyon and changed what my life added up to. And I thought about the fire I'd built before I'd known why, and about how some things you do before you can explain them, and how maybe the best things are like that, done first, understood later, in the long warm light of a life you hadn't thought you'd have.